Fawn Cox is an ordinary girl from Kansas City, Missouri. She was born on March 24, 1973. She and her family lived in a not-so-wealthy neighborhood. Her family lived poorly, but friendly enough. Her parents, Beverly and John, and two younger sisters, Amber and Felicia, lived in a 2-story house on Van Brunt Street. Fawn attended school, enjoyed swimming, went to church regularly, and in her spare time, helped the family. To do this, she took on various part-time jobs during vacations. In 1989, Fawn got a job as a cashier at an amusement park. So on Wednesday, July 26th, she worked her shift. All day long, she stood behind the cash register and sold tickets for the ride. At about 10 o'clock in the evening, the girl finished, and her mother and her youngest sister Felicia took Fawn home by car, as the amusement park was very far from the bedroom community where the Cox family lived. When they arrived home, Fawn went straight upstairs to rest. She had been working all day, and tomorrow she had to get up just as early. The other sister, Amber, was only a year younger than Fawn. She too had a part-time job that night. She was looking after the children of a family of acquaintances, and she wasn't home. It was very hot that night. There was only one air conditioner for the whole house, and that was only on the first floor. Usually, the sisters slept in the separate rooms on the second floor, but that night only Fawn slept upstairs. The younger girls laid down next to the air conditioner, along with the parents. The next day, everyone woke up to Fawn's alarm clock. She didn't turn it off, so Felicia and their mom went upstairs to wake Fawn, but there was already a dead body lying there. The girl was lying in an unnatural pose with bruises gaping on her neck. Felicia recalled going over to her sister to shake her awake. Her mother immediately rushed to check for a pulse, but her daughter was already dead. The family called an ambulance, but they could not help the girl. They only officially recorded her death. The medical examiner found that the girl died due to mechanical asphyxia, and she was also subjected to violence. Immediately, it became clear that the case looked very complicated, because although the girl was killed in a house with poor noise insulation and where the whole family was, unfortunately, no one heard anything. The whole family slept peacefully that night. Only the poodle behaved a bit anxiously, as one of the Cox sisters recalled, but the family wrote off this behavior of the animal due to her pregnancy. Police quickly realized the reason why none of the family had heard any extraneous sounds. They all slept on the first floor because of the air conditioner, but it was already very old, and therefore very noisy. Then, having studied the scene of the crime, the police came to the conclusion that the criminals could be several people, and that they most likely got into the house through a window on the second floor. Some of them could have climbed onto a trailer in the backyard and then climbed through the eaves into the open window. Since it was hot at that time of year, the window on the second floor was open to cool the air in the room in some way. The window was also open that day, making it easier for criminals to get in the house. Afterward, forensic investigators found short hair, drops of blood, and male semen in Fawn's room. All of this was collected, but at the time DNA tests were just beginning to develop, and they couldn't give specific answers as to who was what, so the seemingly solid evidence did little to solve the case on the spot. It also became clear that a radio, a stereo recorder, and a video game console were missing from the house. Some of the Cox family's belongings were lying on the front lawn. It looked as if the perpetrators had dropped the stolen items on the grass, but then changed their minds about taking them. Police also discovered that in the next room, where Fawn's younger sisters usually slept, items had been removed from a closet. Because the girls didn't sleep in their room, no one noticed right away. But at that moment, it became clear that someone was hiding in the closet that night, perhaps even deliberately waiting for the moment when the whole family was asleep to then commit the crime. Also found in Fawn's room was an old army cap, but it didn't belong to any of the family. None of the Cox family recognized it, but it could have belonged to someone they knew, for the police suspected that the perpetrator was familiar with the Cox family. He navigated the family home too well and was familiar with the daily routine. Again, no confirmation of this opinion was ever found. The bottom line seemed to be that with so much evidence, it was not possible to find the perpetrator on a hot trail. DNA testing was not done so thoroughly in those years, and it did not give such accurate results. The perpetrator had to be close to the Cox family, but no one around them was under suspicion. It did not improve the situation that the neighborhood in which the family lived was poor and quite criminal. There thrived criminal groups, and if one of them had committed a crime, it is extremely difficult to arrest him even in the presence of hard evidence, because the testimony of witnesses is almost unrealistic to achieve in such a criminal environment. But after a month, a witness finally came forward in the Fawn case. He gave evidence that made it clear that he was not lying. He even revealed things that the police hadn't disclosed. In the end, the suspects were 3 teenagers, one of whom was in the same class as Fawn. Another was found in possession of stolen items. It was because of them that the police managed to apprehend all 3. But suddenly, a witness recanted. The DNA test came back with a questionable answer, so it could not be used as a basis for the prosecution. But one of the suspects did tell us something. He detailed how he climbed up the trailer onto the carport and then made his way into the house itself. He also revealed something that even the police didn't know, that when he threw the tape recorder away, the handle flew off of it into the bushes. The police found it in the exact spot the suspect described. All indications were that these 3 men were definitely at the Cox family home that night, but suddenly, the guy who testified recanted and would no longer cooperate with the investigation. At some point, the police had to let all 3 go. Only one spent 8 months under investigation for theft, the one who was found in possession of the stolen items. That's how the case came to a dead end. Captain Ben Caldwell, he was a supervisor in the Unsolved Cases Unit, said the case was important to many. Still, the victim was an innocent child that was murdered in their own bed. This shocked many detectives who had worked on the case for decades and couldn't solve it. That's when it became clear to the detectives of those days that only science could help find the perpetrator. In October 1998, CODIS was introduced, a national DNA database. It was created and is still maintained by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. At this point, all 50 states, the District of Columbia, federal law enforcement, the Army Lab, and Puerto Rico participate in a national exchange of DNA profiles. And so in the early 2000s, all the evidence and crime scene DNA data from the Cox family home was entered into the database, but it yielded no matches. At that time, DNA began to give definite answers to a match, so the police collected DNA from all 3 guys once suspected of killing Fawn. But the lab responded that none of them owned the hair, blood, or semen left on the murdered girl's bed. Then the police realized that the guys were really only robbing that house, but the girl was killed by someone else. Someone else had snuck into Fawn's room. He raped her and then killed her. But that begs the question, how no one could miss 4 guys. So the case went cold again. It had no progression until 2018. Amber, one of Fawn's younger sisters, posted her thoughts on the case. She published a post on a forum that is dedicated to solving crimes. This site had gained a good reputation, and some users have even helped solve intricate crimes. Amber on this site initially went through a verification process to confirm her identity, and then wrote her observations that she had been pondering for a long time since her sister's death. She believed the perpetrators snuck into the house when their mom Beverly and sister Felicia went to pick up Fawn in the car. Amber was at an acquaintance's house watching children at the time, and their father was asleep and alone in the house. Most likely, the criminals snuck into the sister's room and hid in a closet. They waited there until everyone was asleep. Amber was also sure that 2 of the criminals knew Fawn. One had gone to school with her, and the other she'd seen at church. He'd met Fawn there and was clearly interested in continuing to hang out. Amber was also convinced that the perpetrators had originally broken into the Cox family home because of Fawn. The police, on the other hand, believed that a robbery was planned, and then the criminals saw an opportunity and took advantage of the girl. Amber thought otherwise. She believed that there was nothing of value in their house, They didn't keep any money or expensive appliances in the home. They didn't have anything to take. Therefore, she believed that the criminals had come for Fawn. She also realized that her sister had been strangled by the younger Felicia's nightgown. This meant that the criminal entered Fawn's room already with the intention of killing her. But unfortunately, Amber's story didn't advance the case in any way. It was 2018. Science had stepped forward, and forensics along with it. Gradually, old crimes were solved, but Fawn's case never moved forward. The girl's relatives were outraged why their daughter's case remained unsolved. The police told them to wait. Funding for such projects was received only from the state, and the queue with unsolved cases is very large. But the Cox family did not stop this. Relatives of the girl in 2019 began to hold a fundraiser so that Fawn's case was taken up as soon as possible. To do this, they participated in interviews and made public appearances to draw attention to Fawn's case. The money was raised quickly. The relatives even announced a reward of $10,000 for information that would help move the case forward. They did everything they could to speed up the process of new tests and assays, but the police department didn't agree to the Cox family's terms. The police didn't want to make a fuss about it, lest other families also start giving money to move the line forward. That would have made it worse, because there were only 2 labs doing the DNA tests. They just couldn't handle the influx. Fawn's relatives, on the other hand, felt that the police were simply not interested in the case. They felt that because they were poor, they were slowing down the investigation of the case. No one is simply not interested in finding the criminals who killed Fawn. So it wasn't until the end of 2020 that a major breakthrough in the case happened. Samples were finally sent to the lab, and in November of that year, they found a match. The killer and rapist turned out to be Donald Cox, the girl's cousin. At the time of the crime, he was 21 years old, and he could be characterized as a troubled guy. He had been tried several times for misdemeanors, but they'd never taken DNA on those cases before, so it took so long to find him. But still, his DNA profile made it into the database, and it sounded like a miracle, because in 2006, the man passed away, and nobody was going to save his DNA. But because the police thought his death was violent, his samples were preserved. That's when experts compared all the DNA again and determined with absolute certainty that it was Donald Cox who committed the crime in 1989. All the evidence pointed to the fact that the 3 men had been in the Cox family home that night. It was also becoming clear how they managed to be unidentified, as Donald visited the family home quite often. Although those guys may have witnessed the crime, no charges were filed against them because the main perpetrator was long dead and they were more like witnesses. Although it could have been that the guys left and Donald stayed behind to do what he came to do. Besides, the relatives themselves had already accomplished what they wanted. They got the name of their daughter and sister's killer, and those 3 had already gotten what they deserved, because for all those years, the whole neighborhood thought they were criminals. They were treated negatively, and the guys' lives had gone horribly wrong. The main criminal lived for 17 years without punishment. He died from his hard and wrong life. As it happened, it took more than 30 years and the latest DNA research technology to uncover the man who committed the murder. When Fawn's parents were told who killed their daughter, they finally experienced bitterness and relief at the truth. They admitted that at one point they had thought on Donald, but there was no good reason to suspect him. Now knowing the truth, they can let their daughter go.